Welcome to the Stoos Business Innovation Program. This is a series on people-friendly change. We're running this series because there are companies that are struggling with change initiatives. They're piling one on top of the other. It's tiresome, it's fatiguing employees, and it's messy. With me today is Dr. David Drake. Dr. David Drake has just published his book on narrative coaching, and what we're here to learn about is why is narrative coaching, or why is narrative even, an outstanding way to facilitate organizational change in a very people-friendly way. So I'm going to go to Dr. David Drake. Hello, David.
Hello, Dawna. How are you?
Excellent, thanks.
Good.
Let's start with the question of narrative, because a lot of companies confuse logic with narrative. Because as I watch on the LinkedIn, you see these conversations saying, well, if you just tell them why, because people don't resist change, they resist having it forced on them. All you have to do is tell them why and all will be well. So give them a logical reason. Is that good enough? What's the difference between logic and narrative in this transformational toolbox?
Well, just to start with, I think why is a great question, but I think there's a misconception that we can just start there. But if you think about many of those famous examples that some of those authors cite, like Apple, for example, they came to their why fairly far down the road. And so a lot of what really turned the company around, for example, was a simple 2x2 matrix that Steve Jobs supposedly wrote on a whiteboard and said, we need one product in each category, that's it. And so it's his drive towards simplicity and elegance that actually helped to streamline his vision for why we do this and really cement his love for design. And then the why became more and more obvious as that became easier for them. So the thing about stories is it's as old as humanity. So it's in our bones. It's what makes us human. It's what allows us to form communities and relationships and identities. So it's a very natural way for people to operate. The hard thing about providing why in a change initiative is that oftentimes it gets put in the hand of very effective comms people who then spin the narrative or create really fancy narratives or logos and slogans and campaigns, and so it takes it away from that human element, and it becomes far beyond what people do during the average day. And so the thing about narratives that works more than just pure logic is that most of us tend to use logic to justify what we do, but we use emotions to make choices and navigate most of our life. And the way that most visions are communicated, or change initiatives are communicated, when they're only at the rational level, it doesn't engage the heart. It doesn't engage what actually drives most human behavior. And so what that means often is that no matter how articulate the leader is, they're presenting a narrative to the employees and say, here, isn't this lovely? And there is often almost no consideration for the narrative that was already going on for the employee about their career, about their life, about their future, about why they chose that company. And so there's the two narratives just kind of fly right by each other. And so for me, it's about, in the past, change was sort of an anomaly for employees who've been around enough. And so it would require periodic uses of discretionary energy. And my observation now is that that we actually do our job with discretionary energy, and change is actually a full-time job now. And so I think it requires a very different approach, and I find the humanizing effect of narratives to be very helpful with that.
If you're a team leader, you're a manager, you're making these decisions, how narrative to engage employees, not to push the change through, because that's a distinction I make a lot, but to invite change through connecting with that narrative and making that narrative, instead of swinging past each other, as you pointed out, be a better fit.
Yeah. So, I think that as humans, we're always asking ourselves, is my story part of a larger narrative that makes sense to me? And so I look at sort of four things that people need to be able to believe in what's going on and have faith in what's going on. They need to feel like they belong. They need to feel like they know what to do and how to behave. They need to feel like, because of this change, I'll become something more or better than I am now. And so we want to be able to share a narrative with employees or with other leaders that helps people kind of come alongside that narrative and begin to imagine in themselves, I can slowly see a way in which I can meet my needs in this new narrative. If it's just sort of thrust on people, or it's not done with a lot of attention to human needs, there's a lot of disconnect, and so people will just pull back and say, I'm just going to wait until this makes any sense. And so a lot of times, in my work, we talk a lot about creating cultures of contribution. So it's really about, can I see how I can contribute to what my company's trying to achieve? Am I enabled to contribute my best self? And if not, what's kind of getting in my way? And from the company's perspective, are we contributing to our employees? Are we designing, simple rules and, streamlined systems and a clear path to success? And so we're just trying to find a way to help people at, again, in Maslow's terms, very basic human needs. Can I see myself in this new future? And just a really quick example, I was helping a government agency. They were moving buildings from the core of the city to a suburb, and they were doing a lot of other changes at the same time. And they were just failing because nobody was getting on board with the change at all. And so I was doing all the transition workshops for all the employees. And so I said, well, I have some ideas about that because I was hearing the stories from the people about why they weren't happy, why they weren't participating. And, it sounds really silly, I suppose, but when I asked them, so what do you most need from your leaders that you're not getting? And they said, we need them to appreciate how this is going to affect us in our lives. And so push comes to shove. The two things they wanted more than anything else was the old building had been on the bus mall in the downtown. Like 65% of the employees took the bus to work. The suburb where they were moving had no bus stops yet, and there was no bus stops anywhere near their new building. And they had no idea how they're going to get to work, right?
Wow, that is such a fundamental question.
And they were supposed to move buildings in 2 or 3 weeks. And then the other thing was, many of us have, because it was a government organization, many of them had worked there for a long time. So we have no idea where our friends are going to be. Are they going to be on my floor? Are they going to be near me? And so I got the executive of the whole agency to hire the bus companies, a bunch of buses, and they basically bussed everybody out to the new building. They got the bus company the transit company to build a stop right in front of the building. They mapped everybody's route to work. Every single employee, they had all the kinds of staff from the bus company. They basically mapped how everybody's going to get to work. And then they took them up into the new building, which was almost done. And somebody had come along and put a little name card for every employee where their new desk was going to be. And then there was all this buzz. Oh, you're going to be over there. Oh, good. And so there was this really lovely human interaction. And the level of stress just plummeted. And people said, well, now I know how I'm going to get to work, and I know where my friends are going to be. Now I'm willing to listen to you, talk to me about my job. And I find that change efforts get too complicated. And most people don't care. They don't know. Where are the basic things for me going to be? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's too easy to sit there and say, well, these people are resisting change because they're not buying in. Yeah. I love that term. I've discovered that term has lots of meanings for people, but they're not getting it. They're not engaging. They're not whatever.
And the reality is they're not buying in, but it's not their fault. That's the appropriate response to poor communication and
poorly thought out change. The fundamental needs is there. I still need to get to work, and I need to know where my place is in the world.
Yeah. Yep.
Working with narrative is a lot different, for example, than just saying go forth and change.
Yes.
And that there's some skill sets that go with that. So let's look now at narrative and how it can support personal growth and as a leader and the expansion of leadership outside of the role of authority, which tends to be a codependent relationship, I think. And so if you kind of separate those two and say, yeah, your authority is over here, but your leadership is here. How can narrative help that leader grow into someone who doesn't rely on authority to get things done, but actually relies on their capacity as a human being?
So I think there's a couple of things. If I think back to a project where I was helping the CEO of a very large bank communicate a really unusually stellar vision for the bank. Usually they're pretty dry, but this one was actually, I don't think they realized until we started working together how profound their vision actually was. And he wanted help communicating that vision to about 400 of his top leaders and top change agents. And so we did a workshop for them on what we call narrative leadership, which is how to frame a change message as a story that mirrors what people are going to need to make sense of that change. And so part of that was then helping people to tap into their own experiences and emotions around change as a leader. Like, what do I feel about this? So they could be a bit vulnerable about their experience, and they didn't have all the answers, and they were in this like everybody else. And so that was important. I think it was useful to begin to imagine what this was like for employees. So we did some pieces around empathy, where they could figure out ways to understand their audience, so that there was always this sort of match between the story they were trying to tell and the journey they wanted the employee to be on. So in our work, for example, we start with situate. So where are we now? And if you can't meet people where they are now, they're not going to come with you on the journey. And oftentimes for leaders, they tend to rush into the message, and they don't ever check, is this person actually with me? Are they actually hearing me? Are they actually engaging with me? And I think part of that too for them personally is that if they come to this as, I'm your leader and I'm going to present this to you, there is certainly a useful function there for people to project authority on you and perceive hopeful safety in you, and that you'll take care of them. And so we got them to look at, well, traditionally in an organization, you would cascade a change message, just like you would cascade a training program. And I don't believe in that. I think it just gets lost in the middle there. And it's like playing telephone as children. The message just gets all sideways. And so we formed this idea of the bank had about 50,000 employees. And we had this metaphor for them around inviting each of these leaders to start hosting campfires. Where they would invite people not to share what the vision meant to them, how it would help them in their job, how it would help their customers, how they would like to interpret it and make it real where they were, and really and what are their stories about change, and how's this going to affect them and their families, and just make it quite personal so that people took ownership of the change message faster. And then what happened in some of the more mature parts of the bank that way, or regions, people started coming up with really clever ideas about what that vision could look like for their customers. And there were some pretty radical ideas about changing the nature of a bank, which were just amazing, just by these leaders getting out of their offices and going down to realize, like, for example, like, 2/3 of their bank tellers now were students and largely stay-at-home mothers. And so there were these two huge audiences that they sort of saw as low-level employees in a way, but actually they represented a large part of the bank's demographic. And we said, we should get those tellers to talk to their counterparts out in the communities. Not us with the big, the ties and the shirts and the fancy dresses and whatever, but these people know their communities. And so they started to begin to think about, why can't we use our large bank spaces for something else? Excellent. And so I think for leaders, getting them out of that tower of, I'm the authority, I'm going to tell you what the vision is, to, I want to host a campfire and I want to hear your stories and I want to hear your ideas about how we can make this vision come to life. And I think that was really, it was challenging for some of the leaders who quite preferred their little tower. But they began to realize that if they were actually going to have integrity around their vision, they actually had to model it, which meant they had to get out of those offices and start to engage people about their stories and their customer stories.
And it's a heck of a lot more rewarding. I mean, you don't know that when you're on the other side before you take that step. But once you take that step, then you realize, wow, this is rich.
Well, because some of them felt anxious, and then when we explored the anxiety, they said, well, I won't have all the answers. I won't know what to do. And I said, well, great. It's welcome to the real world, And I said, if you were just to let go of that expectation of yourself and be clear with them that you're there to listen and ask questions and explore, then it relieves you of that pressure you've put on yourself to solve everything for them. I said and it actually is liberating for them. So it's not quite so demeaning, like, well, you're the boss, you're going to tell me what to do. But you actually say, I want to know what you think about this. How's this vision going to make our bank better? How's it going to make life better for you and your customers? Yeah, and so I think for the ones that gave it a go, it was just brilliant. They loved it. Yeah.
There's a lot of different coaching methods out there.
Yes.
How does narrative coaching set itself apart from any other kind of coaching that the ICF or the various types of coaching schools do? Because I know you've got some programs, you've got some online programs.
Yeah, so we have an online program we teach, and we also do in-person programs in the US and Europe. So I think there's a couple of, there's a lot of differences, but I think two stand out for me. So one is, over the years, having worked in a variety of sort of people-centered activities, I suppose, in the beginning when you have all your training, you think, I have to go do this, and I've got to ask these kind of questions and structure these kind of conversations. And I think all those skills are important, particularly in the beginning of a career. But part of what narrative coaching does is it suspends the need to have to talk so much. And so we actually use silence and listening to drive the conversation, not talking. And so we have this sort of funny line that we should only talk when we can improve on silence. And so we just, it's a much more of a receptive but very sort of fierce process, and that coaches often feel anxious because they're not talking quite as much, and they say it's going to take too long, they're just going to tell stories all the time. And I said, well, particularly if you're in a company, that people will do that if they don't trust you. Right? Because they'll be anxious, and I said, but if you can build that trust by your presence with them, the vast majority of people will relax, and their real story will come out much faster. And so I've actually had these little contests sometimes when I've gone out to speak to coaching programs and whatnot. And it is rare that I don't get done, if you will, faster than the other person, because they're trying to ask all these questions and putting people through processes and doing all this stuff. And I'm just like waiting, and I'm just being with people and asking a few simple questions, and a lot gets revealed. So I think the use of silence, the use of relationship is very different. I think the second thing, and probably the most unique thing about narrative coaching for me, is that most coaching is built on, we're going to have this really profound conversation. At the end of that conversation, or maybe even before, you're going to set some goals for yourself, and we'll have a plan for those goals, and then you'll go off and you'll do something about that or not. The reality is that the vast majority of people either do the goal, but they would have anyways, even without you. They're just that kind of a person. Or they don't do the goals at all, or don't do them very well. And so we do two things very differently. So anything that we expect the coachee to do differently, we get them to practice in the coaching session. And so we do everything in real time. We only work with their narrative material. We get them to do experiments. And so we do it right then and there. We don't set goals at all. And the second thing is that the people, in the way we structure the coaching process, is not a formula for the coach to do this, then this, then this. It's like, here's the normal human evolution in a developmental process. How do people grow, and what phases they tend to go through? And we just mirror that as we coach. So we coach them through a development process that's based on how people develop, not on our coaching structure. And so it means that as people are growing as they're being coached, and so when they get to the end of the process and they've identified what they're starting to do differently, they're now a more developed person than when they started the conversation. So they have a much stronger platform to actually go do something. And again, it goes back to the use of silence, because my observation is most coaches ask questions to gather information for themselves, because it's based on a belief that if I understand what's going on for you, I can be more helpful. And what we do is we say that that's not true. The model is mirrored after what people are going through, not our coaching structure. And my only job is to help the coachee to understand themselves. And so I don't need to understand anything they're saying. And my questions are not from my head and my understanding. It's from the experience we're having in the moment and what they're telling me and what's happening as a result of what they're telling me. So everything stays with the coachee and what's happening in the field between us. And so I don't spend time agonizing in coaching what I'm going to ask next. I don't have to. I mean, I just follow where the coachee's going, and I notice certain patterns in their story or their narration. I notice parts of their story they're avoiding. I'm noticing feelings in the room, and I'm just reframing that and putting it back on the coachee. And my question is, are to help them see themselves, see their stories, see the situation differently, and then invite them to new perspectives or new actions. But it doesn't have to pass through me to get back to the coachee. It just stays right there in the room, and we can do that because we're basically bringing all the story in their mind or their body out into the room. And so we're working with the story material in real time, and when we're done, we help them sort of reconfigure some pieces of that and give it right back to them. Yeah.
So where do people go for more information?
Well, they can go to the website, which is on your screen. It's www.narrativecoaching.com. And you can see some things about both work we do with practitioners to develop these skills in them. We also can find out information on how we do this in organizations. So one of the beauties of narrative coaching is the model, because it's based on development and an integrative view of development, it can scale to any size you want. So I've run large-scale change projects using the same model I would use with an individual. And going back to where we started, it allows everybody to organize around one frame. And the frame, quite beautifully and intentionally on my part, not only mirrors change and development, it also mirrors the 4 elements of a story. So the narrative structure is built right into the model. And so we basically help take them on a journey to move to a different story for themselves or for the entire organization.
Sounds like fun. I'd love to join you at some point. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much for being on the program. I appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
And for those of you from the Stoos community, the Business Innovation Idea Exchange, this is a monthly program we run. Join us at stoossparks.com, where you'll find some other conversations that have happened worldwide. And we'll see you again next month.